حي على الفلاح.
Kyrgyzstan's fascinating culture and long history is colored by its hardy people's struggle to overcome the harsh climate, inhospitable steppes, and towering mountains that cover most of the land. The nomadic herding lifestyle of cattle and sheep was always more important than settled agricultural pursuits, and contributed to the tribal clan system, which is still in use today. Although the majority of Kyrgyz now live in or near cities and towns, their heritage still influences their love of this wild country. Islam was introduced to the Kyrgyz tribe between the 9th and 12th centuries. The most intense exposure of Islam occurred in the 17th century, when the Jungars drove the Kyrgyz of the Tian Shan region into the Fergana Valley, whose population was all Muslim. However, as the danger from the Jungars subsided and Kyrgyz groups returned to their previous region, the influence of Islam became weaker. When the Quqon Khanate conquered the territory of Kyrgyz in the 18th century, the nomadic Kyrgyz remained aloof from the official Islamic practices of that regime. By the end of the 19th century, however, most of the Kyrgyz population had been converted to at least a superficial recognition of Islamic practice. Today, 90% of the country's population were followers of Islam. Muslims in Kyrgyzstan are generally of the Sunni branch, mostly of the Hanafi school. The territory of Kyrgyzstan, like the whole of Central Asia, is one of the oldest centers of human civilization. Research by archaeologists show that primitive man has mastered here since the Stone Age. The formation of the Kyrgyz people was attended by many ethnic groups that lived in the vast expanses of southern Siberia and Central Asia. The Kyrgyz, an ethnic group known in Central Asia already in the first millennium BC, have conveyed their self-name through the centuries to the present day. The region now known as Kyrgyzstan has seen many invasions and colonizations over the centuries. First settled during the prehistoric period, it became home to Scythian clans, including the first millennium BC, before coming under the control of various Turkic alliances from the 6th century onwards, a period in which the region prospered from its prime location on the Silk Road between China and Europe. Islam arrived in the 8th century, but the Arabs did not stay long, and the region came under the control of the Khanate dynasty based in Bukhara shortly afterwards. Kyrgyz tribes started to arrive from southern Siberia sometime around the 10th century, although they soon fell victim to Genghis Khan's Mongol horde that was plundering and devastating vast tracts of Central Asia at this time. Before Islam, the religion of the Kyrgyz people was totemism, the recognition of spiritual kinship with a particular type of animal. Under this belief system, which predated their contact with Islam, Kyrgyz tribe adopted reindeer, camels, snakes, owls, and bears as objects of worship. The sun, moon, and stars also played an important religious role. The strong dependence of the nomads on the forces of nature reinforced such connections and fostered belief in shamanism, the power of tribal healers and magicians with mystical connections to the spirit world, and black magic as well. Traces of such beliefs remain in the religious practice of many of today's Kyrgyz. Islam was introduced to the Kyrgyz tribes between the 9th and 12th centuries. The Kyrgyz are Sunni Muslims of the Hanafi school of law, but the degree to which the North and South adhere to religious practices must be considered when understanding the role of Islam in Kyrgyzstan. The distinction is often made between the religious practices of Islam and the everyday cultural practices of Islam. Islamic mosques and madrasa were built by the 16th century in the southern regions of Kyrgyzstan. One of the most important holy places for Muslims in Kyrgyzstan is the throne of Suleiman in the southern city of Osh. It is sometimes referred to by Soviet Muslims as the Second Mecca. By contrast, Islam came to northern Kyrgyzstan in a slower, less encompassing manner. Many ancient indigenous beliefs and practices, including shamanism and totemism, coexisted syncretically with Islam. This split between the northern and southern Kyrgyz in their religious adherence to Muslim practices can still be seen today. Likewise, the Sufi order of Islam has been one of the most active Muslim groups in Kyrgyzstan for over a century. The four Sufi tariqas, paths to Allah, that brought Islam to the Kyrgyz and remain in Kyrgyzstan are the Naqshbandiya, which is Bukharan and very popular and powerful, the Qadiriya, an ancient tariqa, the Yasawiya, a South Kazakhstan tariqa, and the Kubrawiya, a Khwarezm tariqa. From the 13th century, the region and its nomadic tribes sank into total obscurity, controlled by various Turkic rulers. Kyrgyzstan lost not only its autonomy and independence, but also its distinct language and culture. The famous Silk Road between China and Europe continued to bring riches to the remote caravanserai towns scattered across the mountain valleys. A brief century of freedom was followed by periods of rule by Juch Khan, son of Genghis, and his forces, the Oirat tribe, and in 1510, the Jungar Khans. Kalmyk armies invaded in the 17th century, Manchus from China in the mid-18th century, and Uzbek forces in the early 19th century. Worse still, in 1876, Kyrgyzstan fell under the control of the Russian Empire. The takeovers spawned violence and revolts, with many Kyrgyz fleeing to Afghanistan or the high Parnir Mountains. By 1916, a Central Asian uprising triggered by Russian imposition of a military draft on the region's people resulted in a Kyrgyz exodus to China. The Soviet era began in 1918 with the creation of the Kara-Kyrgyz Autonomous Oblast, which became the Kyrgyz Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic in 1926. 10 years later, the region was incorporated as a fully integrated USSR Union Republic. Under the Soviets, religious activity and belief were strongly discouraged. Although not eradicated, the Soviets printed anti-Islamic books for Kyrgyz consumption and gave anti-religious lectures. Anti-religious propaganda was seen or heard in the opera, the ballet, the theater, and over the radio. The Soviets also formed motor clubs, whose task it was to bring anti-religious propaganda to isolated regions. Reforms in the 1980s made open religious observance possible for the first time in many decades. A significant number of Kyrgyz observe Muslim practices in their everyday lives, but not in a religious sense. But Islam is making a revival in Kyrgyzstan. Religious revival has been a hallmark of Kyrgyzstan's short post-independence history. As the country continued the policy of openness ushered in during Gorbachev's perestroika, the result has been a steady growth in both the degree of religiosity and the diversity of and within faiths. As the majority of the country's 5.7 million people identify as Muslims, Islam has been at the forefront of such developments. Preachers of all strands have been allowed in. According to the State Commission for Religious Affairs, an institution of the presidency that regulates relations between the state and religious organizations, while in 1990, there were 39 mosques operating in Kyrgyzstan. In 2014, that number reached 2,362 mosques and 81 Islamic schools within the structure of the Muftiate, as well as 68 registered Muslim centers, foundations, an association involved in educational, awareness raising, and charitable activities and the construction of places of worship. The Muftiate represents the closest approximation to official Islam in a country that defines itself as secular. And along with the state apparatus, it sets the boundaries of what Islamic tradition means in Kyrgyzstan. Scholars, however, point out that the country's traditional Islam incorporates many elements of pre-Islamic religions and cults, including shamanism, animism, Zoroastrianism, ancestor worship, and the cult of nature. It is the syncretism that the Salafi scholars of Kyrgyzstan take issue with, along with other doctrinal and legal matters. Salafis are but one among many diverse strands of Islam in Kyrgyzstan, where Tablighi Jama'at operates freely, though without an official registration, alongside an array of Sufi orders. The Bishkek resident, who has spent years working for an international organization in many construction projects, aptly captures these mixed feelings towards Islamization. In Novostroyki, Islam is more and more a feature of daily life. Prayer rooms and mosques are being built, and people behave in a manner they consider to be in accordance with Sharia. Young and old mobilize around religion. They come together in groups to discuss Islam and understand how to be better Muslims. One point appears to find everyone in agreement, however. Kyrgyzstan lacks the number of qualified cadres necessary to satisfy the growing need for Islamic education. The SCRA indicates that only 20% of clerics have a basic religious education from madrasas and Islamic institutes. Akim Ergeshinov, the head of the religious education department at the Muftiate, doubles down. We are starved for funds, and it is very dangerous that people think they are Muslims but no one is teaching them about Islam. If someone has a desire to know, he'll satisfy it whether you offer a chance or not. A diverse collection of Islamic organizations and institutions are stepping in and providing the food, shelter, and education that the central government cannot. Today, the vast majority of people in Kyrgyzstan are Muslims. As of 2020, 90% of the country's population were followers of Islam. Muslims in Kyrgyzstan are generally of the Sunni branch, mostly of the Hanafi school. Kyrgyzstan culture is heavily influenced by the traditions from nomadic life. Kyrgyz culture features influence from Russia, Persia, and Turkey, but yet remains something entirely unique. Nature influences are prominent, from the designs to the music, and many traditions reflect the fact that nomads lived closely with nature. Perhaps the most well-known aspect of Kyrgyz culture is the Epic of Manas, an incredibly long poem passed down orally for generations. As nomads, the Kyrgyz people always lived closely with nature. From their housing to their clothing, everything was designed to adapt to changing weather and locations. Yurts are easy to take apart and carry, and can be made warmer for winter and cooler for summer. The textiles inside of yurts, such as shirdaks and tushkiz, felt rugs, and embroidered hangings, take their inspiration from designs found in nature, such as plants, animals, and landscapes. Even clothing was made out of natural materials and designed to be comfortable while still stylish. Though Kyrgyzstan is also still a modern country, people are proud of the culture in Kyrgyzstan, and events are held to make sure that it is kept alive and promoted.